SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Matt Trifiro, CMO of Vapor.io, an internet infrastructure firm that is developing the largest nationwide colocation and interconnection platform. Their product is called Kinetic Grid, and it delivers a new class of internet services at the edge of the last mile network. He's also the host of his own podcast, Over the Edge. Matt's current company is not exactly a SaaS, but Matt's got quite the career history that includes plenty of marketing leadership roles in software and SaaS, and like me, was a programmer early in his career. Hey, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
Happy to have you. It's going to be a great one. And before we dig in, could you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself and make real your company, Vapor.io?
Yeah, sure. So I call myself a reluctant marketer because I was originally a programmer. I thought I was going to be a great programmer, and it turns out that there are other people that are much better at programming. And so when I got into college, I studied philosophy and linguistics and cognitive science. And I don't know, I thought I was going to invent the next best AI. But it turns out that I'm a good communicator, and a lot of marketing is communication. So I've worked in almost every department in companies, mostly Series A, Series B startups, although one of the companies I founded went public back in the 80s. And I've had, as you said, a pretty varied career all over the map.
Yeah, well, it's funny to talk about not being a great programmer. I think I was an okay programmer, but if you're listening out there and you have this problem, let me know. I'm a crazy good debugger. So if you need something,
you find bugs or you resolve them?
I can resolve bugs in languages I haven't even written code in. It's like this weird skill. It's like I'm the Rain Man of debugging or something.
That's really cool.
So let's talk a little bit about Vapor. I introduced you saying it's not exactly a SaaS, but you said there's a little more to the story.
Yeah. So if you think about the internet that we built, right, it's primarily designed to deliver content to humans. And we're moving into a completely new era where most of the traffic on the internet is going to be machines talking to machines. And, the speed that a human requires for interaction is glacial compared to machines. Humans measure time in ones of seconds, and machines measure it in milliseconds, microseconds, nanoseconds. And so the internet we built isn't the internet we need if it's going to service all these machines. And essentially the fundamental shift is today's internet largely emerges from the core. You've got these very large data centers that Amazon, Netflix, and all these companies build and operate where power is cheap typically, where land and power is cheap. And then they distribute that content down. And there's content delivery networks and stuff out at the edge, but they just cache data and push it for the most part. And so what we need to do is we need to take those giant data centers that are at the core, and we need to break them up into a lot of pieces. Well, we'll keep them there. We'll make other ones like that, break them up into pieces and put them all around our metro areas. So for example, we have in Las Vegas, we've got 10 sites designed for data centers, all interconnected with fiber. And so what that means is you can put workloads there, internet workloads that can deliver services within a city region in milliseconds or microseconds. And that's enabling a whole new class of internet services. Now, the SaaS piece here is the very first use cases we're seeing are fairly straightforward. It's workloads that are today locked on the enterprise premises because they're on premise, they have their own servers and compute and stuff like that. And the enterprise doesn't want to be in the data center business anymore, especially now that a lot of the new applications, say like smart retail, automated checkout, requires pretty beefy, like NVIDIA GPUs and stuff, and you need a real data center. And a store is not, a Starbucks or a 7-Eleven. It's not a place to have anything that looks like a data center. And so the way that this new internet that we've created, with this extension of the internet we've created, can solve for that is you can just pull all that equipment out of the premises and put it on the infrastructure that exists within the urban region and deliver those services to the premises. And here's the SaaS thing, is enterprises want to buy things as a service. And so you're seeing, loss prevention for retailers per camera per month, right, as a service. You're seeing, smart retail delivered as a service, factory automation delivered as a service. And what's really creating that mechanism is the enterprise desire to not be in that business, the enterprise desire to have the vendor take on more risk, share the risk with them, and the cloud economics that this infrastructure that companies like mine are building at the edge. And that's creating a whole new, XaaS, anything as a service business, but for things that we don't typically think of as a service.
So it's really the Internet of Things also pushing this out, right? So it's creating the demand for compute at the edge of the network.
Yeah, that's right.
Makes a lot of sense. Hey, our focus here, as you know, is trying to help CEOs and CMOs drive revenue. So I want to dig into some of the topics that we've talked about before. And I want to get right into what I think is the bane of many CMOs' existence. Especially if you're the new kid on the block, the first thing everybody hits you with is, boy, our lead generation is dead. We need help in lead gen.
Right.
So I want to talk about the state of lead generation with you. You have some great perspective on this. Specifically things surrounding the outreach, the cold outreach that CMOs and CROs are kind of forced to wrangle with and reluctantly do in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the CEOs I advise have inherited marketing techniques that are, at least a decade old. And that includes, banks of SDRs or BDRs, cold calling. And in fact, I had a conversation with one of my CEOs that I coach, and I'm like, why are you doing that? Why are you calling people that aren't asking to be called? And he's like, well, it works. And I said, what do you mean it works? He said, well, that generates qualified leads for the sales team. And I said, well, okay, give me some of the numbers. Like, what's your demo booking rate? And he says, oh, it's 0.7%. Right? 0.7%. And I said, it doesn't sound like it's working to me. Like, where else could you spend that money? And I think people are afraid because, you've got this source of incoming leads, but it's got a horrible conversion rate. And yet you continue to do these activities as opposed to new activities. So I think a lot of the things that we've inherited over the past, or the vendors have sold us or continue to sell us, put us in a pattern of doing things very ineffectively.
Well, the vendors selling us stuff is a future topic, a couple bullets down on our list. But I think the SDR motion is one of those things that just creates a difficult work culture, right? It's like, it's bad inside the business. And you have these, young people primarily who get kind of churned up over this, right? So we bring a new crop in every quarter, and it's the Hunger Games of lead generation, and only the fittest survive, which I guess is only the people most willing to put up with, 1 out of 150 or 200 people being willing to go further. But it's sort of a rotten core at the whole business of trying to create opportunity.
Well, this isn't what your customers want. And I think there's good data to back that up. Right? Most buyers in enterprise software, for example, do approximately 80% of their research before they want to talk to a salesperson. And when they're ready to talk to a salesperson, they'll raise their hand, right? They know that's going to require an investment. They know what's going to happen, right? They're prepared for it. And so they're going to do all their research elsewhere. They're going to talk to colleagues. They're going to go on LinkedIn. And they're going to, look at the review sites and G2 and TrustRadius and Capterra and all these things. And then they're going to say, okay, this is in my consideration set. I'm ready to buy. I want to talk to somebody in sales. And that's the moment where they actually want to have a conversation, not before that. So there's good data to back up the fact that, the outbound stuff is really not a great approach, but they just think that intuitively. Like, how do you want to buy software? I mean, I don't want people to call me. I mean, anybody with a C in their title is smart enough not to answer their phone in the middle of the day from people they don't know, or at least typically they don't answer their phone. And if they do, they're going to be upset if they're talking to somebody who's trying to pitch them something that they're not ready to buy and they don't really care about yet. And same with email. I mean, like, I've got a Gmail filter that filters out anything with the word unsubscribe anywhere in the email, which, it captures about 75% of the cold emails. And so the question is, like, why would you subject your future customer to things that you wouldn't even tolerate yourself?
Yeah. And some of those old tactics, like I still can't believe I even did it once or twice. Like the paying for the demo. I think I had one customer do the pay for the demo. It was
Yeah, the $250 Amazon card. Like, what's that about?
yeah, it's terrible.
But it works, Ken, quote unquote.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I'm ashamed to have to admit I did it once, but we were desperate to get people to respond. It does work though in research. I have found that if we offer a charitable contribution to a C-level exec for a bona fide research project, we actually get the kind of traction we need.
Well, yeah, because the CEO doesn't need your $200 Amazon gift card, but to make a contribution to a cause and to support research, like, yeah, that makes sense. Or to be invited to and participate in a field event, a nice dinner. And it's not so much because I'm going to, get a free steak or whatever. It's because the topic is well put together. Like, it's actually something I'm interested in with other people in my peer group that I want to meet or be part of. And so I'm getting a lot of value out of it. And the vendor is a catalyst. But you're not trying to engage me in a hardcore sell motion.
You mentioned Trust Radius, and I think they're doing amazing work, validating a lot of the stuff we kind of knew was true and highlighting a lot about what buyers really prefer. So I think that's great. And Vinay Bhagat, the CEO, runs some CMO dinners, just like you're talking about. And if they want to get together with their peers, he's a very thoughtful character. So he's a great facilitator. But yeah, I think the cold hard outreach, if it isn't dead, boy, it's really leaving the stage, has to.
Yeah. And especially with high-level executives, right? I mean, you and I had this conversation about the podcast, which is, look, you're delivering me value because I'm enjoying the conversation. I get to advance my personal brand, talk about my company a little bit. I mean, that's all good. When we're done, we will have probably spent 90 minutes between the couple of phone calls we've had. I'll answer your emails. I'll respond to you. If you say, hey, look, is there some business that we might be able to help you with? I'll respond and give you an honest answer because you've built that relationship. You've delivered some value. You're not some rando, just out of college trying to get me to, just go hit a calendar link and go to a demo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we're coaching our clients, right? Is that the outreach has to be with some kind of embedded value. We have to give it right away. And we have to be really giving of the value. It can't just be with a quid pro quo. So
yeah, and I understand the fear that CEOs and even CMOs have in trying something different, right? It's just like this cargo cult. It's like, oh my God, I need 6 cents or I'm not going to be successful, or I can't get rid of my BDRs because it's working. I think there's this self-immolating cycle that we get into.
Oof. Yeah, well, maybe it's really the tyranny of the KPIs, right? So you have these artificial KPIs that don't actually measure movement toward revenue, but there's something a CFO or a CEO can put on a spreadsheet and say, we had 2,000 outbound calls and we had this many connects and we had this many conversations and so on and so forth. But the correlation between all that activity and revenue, I think that's diverging, right? So those KPIs might have worked 10, 12 years ago, but they've been declining since. And now I think the correlation almost is non-existent. You brought up something that I was going to wait to talk about, but let's just dig into it. I kind of put it in the category of marketing tech madness, but I think I've viewed this business, I've been in a long time. For some time, I've thought of it as a fashion business. We as marketers, we get some new toy, and there's a big new toy right with us right now, this Chat GPT. But before that was a little bit of data called intent data, which was, hey, Matt's out there consuming content about, expense management. Maybe Vapor needs expense management software. And maybe we don't even know it's Matt. We just know somebody at Vapor.io is consuming this kind of software, this category of business need. And all of a sudden, people at Vapor at a high level, everybody in expense management is, trying to assault you guys, trying to get a demo. And I think intent data was really highly valuable 5 years ago, 4 years ago, when nobody else had it. What's your thought about that in terms of the flocking to the technique or the tactic to the point where it kind of devalues it?
Well, I look at it a little bit like back in the day, if you were one of the first smart advertisers on Facebook, you could get a lot of business very inexpensively because it was a new channel. It was a new way to do it. And I think TikTok maybe is reaching its peak for that. And so you think about it, right? If you're the only person using that technique, or there's a small group of people, you're going to stand out and you're going to be able to take advantage of that. It's not going to be a lot of competition for the advertising. You're going to win the auctions and so on. But once everybody piles in, it's a law of diminishing returns. And that was the arc of the Facebook ad, right? Like people were making millions and millions of dollars. And they're like, well, like, I don't know what happened. Well, it's because you got another 10,000 people just like you are now advertising on Facebook, competing for that inventory and competing for the buyer's attention, and it's just gone. So you need to find the next thing. And I think intent data is the same way, right? I mean, to some extent, you can't ignore it even today because it's a little bit like an arms race, right? But there is this diminishing returns. The people who used intent data really well early on crushed it because nobody else was doing it. Now that everybody's doing it, you're competing with everybody else for that same outcome. And so I think, like I said, you can't ignore it. You really should be looking for that next thing.
Yeah, so there it is. And I think that's one of the education mandates that marketing leaders have, right? We have to let people know we're going to do this. It may or may not work, and it may only work for a period of time. And as the returns diminish, you're going to hear me with a new thing. I'm coming into your office soon with something new to try. And I was thinking about like social media that didn't make it, or at least not on my radar. This thing like Clubhouse was supposed to be a really big thing, sort of like a live radio.
Yeah, for a hot minute, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so I can imagine CMOs going into the CEO's office saying, hey, there's this hot thing, Clubhouse, we're going to get on it. And if you didn't set the expectation that it may or may not work, you might have been in a little trouble afterwards. But I just think we need to keep looking for what's next and be agile marketers from the standpoint of looking for the possibilities in either new marketing technologies that come into play or, new media opportunities. And, here at Austin Lawrence, we're a pretty big HubSpot shop. So I got in the alpha for its ChatSpot, which is a chat GPT integration. And my people don't even know it, but tomorrow in our monthly marketing meeting, we're going to be talking about ChatSpot and how we can deploy it for ourselves and our customers. So I think you have to be on the edge, and you have to also have something of a gimlet eye and be willing to say, hey, it may or may not work.
Yeah, I think that the other piece of this is there are some first principle activities that will always work, or at least they should always work. I mean, so when we look at some of these intent-based things, like in the broad category of account-based marketing, well, there was account-based marketing before there were tools for account-based marketing, right? They were called target accounts. And you would partner with sales to figure out how to bring value to that account, right? To become an expert in that potential customer, and then deliver marketing and sales to that customer in a way that adds value and understands their needs. And that doesn't change. I mean, hopefully you've never stopped doing that. So I think there's like basic activities. There was this content marketing, right? And like everybody's now with Chat GPT, it's like, oh my God, I can publish 20 articles a day and do all this. Like, well, how many articles can your audience read? And if they all are kind of the same gibberish, is there any value? Well, no, the person actually sits down and figures out what their audience actually cares about and puts something together that addresses that in a unique and differentiated way. Whether or not they use an AI tool to help do that is who's going to win. And so I think it's like the map is not the territory, right? The tool is not the point.
Wait, the marketing technology is not marketing? Is that what is that the revelation here?
Yeah, I think so. I think I just coined a new term. Yeah. The marketing technology is not the marketing. Absolutely. Right. It's a tool just like any other.
Yeah. In fact, so I've been doing this business too long, but to date myself, there was no internet. There barely were computers. There was no electronic layout. And guess what? We had target accounts. We even had our form of attribution. What did we do? Right? We asked people how they heard of us.
Right.
And we haven't solved attribution, right? There's no one who can say, hey, attribution, it's done. We figured it out and, everybody's satisfied with it. But I think this was your point. It's like, all we have to do is ask.
That's an amazing thing, and I learned that in the middle of my career, right around the time when like split testing and landing page optimization was a thing, right? Where it's like, everything's got to be data driven. And it occurred to me one day, it's like, we're trying to like run enough traffic through these 2 pages, trying to figure out which value proposition is going to be more effective. And we don't know how to interpret the results. And so I said, well, why don't we call 20 customers and just ask them? And it turned out that qualitative data is data, right? It's a different kind of data. And just like attribution, like you can get so much better attribution by asking the person, how they first heard about you, right? As opposed to like trying to, read the tea leaves through these tools that have no idea where it's really coming from. And especially now with tracking becoming more and more opaque.
I think it's sort of like a humanistic view of marketing. So we can start by asking people questions about what they do for work in the context of what we want to sell them, right? And what the pressures are on them. So we can really understand our customers and prospects better. And then we can try and generalize from that, right? And when I was in business school, we kind of called that management quality data. It might not have been statistically perfect data, but we can make management decisions based on that data. So we can make marketing decisions.
Well, and when it ties to a single customer. So when I had my first child, I was shopping on Amazon. And I was imagining the marketers on Amazon thinking about, well, how do I know? Because, this is like the people that bought these other things, like it was all this sort of affinity product magic. And I was thinking, how are they going to figure out that I'm now in the market for baby stuff if I haven't bought anything on Amazon baby stuff? And I was just imagining the product managers back at Amazon trying to think, how are we going to look into this data, figure all this stuff out? And that just occurred to me. It's like, if Amazon asked me, I would tell them. If they popped up a box and said, do you have any young children in your house, or just some other demographic information, I would answer Amazon's question. Like, why not? And then, okay, I start seeing diapers and discounts and all kinds of other things. And so I think we become enamored with the technology and we forget that there's often simple ways to get at the problem from a different direction.
Yeah. So I think one of the takeaways for our CMO brethren would be, let's look at all the ways we're trying to automate things and see what it costs us. And see what we lose sight of and what we might be able to do differently, right? Because I think throughout our marketing spectrum of tactics and tools, we could probably humanize a lot of our processes and maybe get better data that we can act on quicker, right?
More efficiently, yeah. Totally agree.
That's really true. And I think also for smaller companies, and a lot of the clients we work with are not gigantic, they're, let's call it 100 million and less. Mm-hmm. So they don't have limitless marketing budgets. And the tech can eat up a lot of that budget, right? And
you've always going to be asking, what could I be doing with that money? Is there a better way to spend it than on 10 BDRs? Is there a better way to spend it than on, $100,000 tool? And sometimes the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good conversation to try and have with someone. We're gonna have to find a guest who can really pull apart the market, the $1.5 million marketing budget and talk through like decision making on that. I think that would be a really great episode. One of the things in this arena is talking about customer lifetime value.
Yeah.
And you have a take on that I'd love to have you share in terms of trying to simplify that for people.
Yeah. So, SaaS companies are relatively new, and it's almost like their investors think they invented this idea of customer lifetime value. But actually, every business has a customer lifetime value. I mean, any business that expects any sort of repeat business, Crest toothpaste, like that's a renewal. Every time you go into a store and you buy the same brand that you bought before, that's a renewal. And while it's not technically a subscription, it is recurring revenue. And there is a value to retaining that customer over time. I remember back in the 80s, I was a real fan of the work that Tom Peters did, his In Search of Excellence and things like that. And he told a story about just in his own office, where the FedEx person would come in every day and get the packages from his receptionist. And Tom was saying, look, when that FedEx person, it's the same person every day, comes in, they should see $180,000 on my receptionist's forehead, because I spend $1,500 a month on FedEx. I'm probably going to be a customer for 10 years. And that's $180,000. In fact, it's maybe more than that, because if I have a really great experience with FedEx, I might get them one other customer. I might rave about them to somebody else. So now, I'm worth twice that, right? I'm worth $360,000. And if you think about a typical FedEx person might have 40 stops, they're managing a $14 million portfolio of customers. And so those numbers in terms of like how you should invest in retaining customers, because that's your number one source of word of mouth. That's where your recurring revenue comes from. I think it's been demonstrated across many industries with really good research that it costs less to retain an existing customer than it does to acquire a new one. A lot of debate around that, but I think the research is pretty buttoned up. It's not magic. Just say, okay, well, how much is this person going to pay? How long do I think they're going to be my customer? How much does it cost me to serve that customer? With a SaaS business, it's, near zero cost of goods sold, maybe some service stuff. And so that profit going on and the value accrues. One of the most interesting things with customer service was the US government funded study that was done by a group called TARP, Technical Assistance Research Project, I think. And they repeated this research over 20 years. But they've convincingly, to me, proven that a customer who has a complaint and has it resolved is more loyal than a customer that never has a complaint. And so, yeah, when you start thinking about these things, you realize that how you invest in retaining your customers determines the lifetime value. And as a marketer, that's how you get budget, right? It's not just like, well, what's the first year value of that customer? It's like, no, if we bring a customer in and it's, 30,000 and we can retain that customer for 5 years, well, that gives me a lot more money to spend on acquiring customers with data that demonstrates that because we've retained this customer, it's worth quite a bit more than the first year's bookings.
Well, so there's a few things to unpack in that.
Yeah.
First of all, like the evil marketer would create the bump in the road for a customer, right? So we could create the bump in the road so that we can do a great rescue and enhance the yield. And I don't know about you, but when I get the email, like the marketing email that says, oops, we didn't mean to send you that, right? So, oops, we didn't mean to mess you up.
You're more evil than I am. I had not even occurred to me to do that.
Well, assuming that no one behaves in an evil fashion,
yeah.
If you're listening, Google, do no harm, right? Or don't be evil. Anyway, I think that's a really important point, that the lifetime value is to be managed. And in fact, one of the problems we have is that the culture of many of these companies is sales-led. So the new logo gets all the glory. And maybe one of the takeaways here is that the people that do the retention work and the expansion work, they deserve some corporate glory, and maybe CEOs who might listen, could take a look at how do they compensate and how do they recognize the folks that renew and upsell.
There's a big paradigm shift you have to go through. So I work with a company that looks at accounts receivable as customer success because, well, first of all, their attitude is, look, it's not revenue until you have the cash, right? And so closed one is not done. Right? Like, great, you got the booking, but now we need to go turn that into revenue. And so you've got this accounts receivable approach. Now, especially if a good customer, if a good customer has a horrible accounts receivable experience, they might not want to be your customer anymore. And so you want to collect the money, but you also want to do it in a really sensitive way so that customer has a good experience so that you can retain them over time. And so I think that there's a really interesting shift there, because I don't think most people think of accounts receivable as customer retention. But yeah, if I was in a situation where I was having a cash flow crunch and I couldn't pay one of the vendors that I really like, and they called me up and said, hey, look, how can we work this out? We understand things happen. I'd feel a lot better about that relationship than if I got, 20 dunning letters and was told I was evil.
Well,
yeah,
it's a good point in the agency business. The number one reason people fire their agencies has nothing to do with creative, contribution to revenue, none of those things. It's,
bedside manner.
What's it like to do business with you?
Yeah.
And AR is a big friction point. So yeah, it's interesting. So if we were going to try and give like 2 or 3 recommendations to the new CMO at a SaaS company, this is the curveball, sorry. But if you had a couple of recommendations based on what you see happening, new CMO and a SaaS struggling to drive revenue, what kind of questions would you be asking? Like, where would you be asking them to look to see what they could be fixing?
Well, I would go inside first, right? Like, what does your database look like? Are there any leaks at the bottom of the funnel? It's not that hard to find, especially in the world that I live in with relatively new startups that don't have these big operational machines that have been worked out over years. But I looked at Salesforce too, and they had all kinds of problems like this, where, you have a lead that comes in that scores high, but it goes completely untouched for months because it got into some weird eddy that nobody was aware of. And so I think looking at that, I also think, like, again, we're so targeted at outward looking, like, how do we get that new customer that's out there, like, as you said, showing some intent to buy it? Well, why don't we go to our existing customers that love us and ask for referrals? You can't go to that well that many times, but referral business is very high closing, and your great customers be happy to refer you. And so, I think there's a lot of sort of just very basic things that you can do coming in to do that. The other thing is I would think about like the new buyer journey. Like, again, don't assume your customers don't buy things like you do. Assume they do. And you can research this and prove it to yourself. But I think you'll find that most customers want to learn about the problem and the solutions themselves. And so you have to think, how do I get my branded content, educational content that's relevant to that customer's problem they're trying to solve out in front of them before they want to talk to a salesperson or even visit my website? So you need to be thinking about things like that. And then the third thing that I think I would look at, because I think this is new, this is like the new TikTok, ecosystems. And I don't mean sort of partner channel stuff. I mean ecosystems. So trying to think of a relevant example. Well, in my world, we've created an ecosystem with large partners, and it's called the Open Grid Alliance. And what's interesting about that, especially as a small company around these larger companies, is that if you create let's say a movement of some importance that lots of other companies will invest in, because it's not yours, you don't own it, but you're contributing to it, they will all spend their marketing budget helping advance your cause. And so rather than trying to be the one thing that's standing by itself that you have to tell everybody about, be the best thing within that ecosystem for whatever problem those companies share in common, and let them do the marketing for that new problem set, like these new types of applications that run at the edge. And then, you're known within that because you're a thought leader and you're a technology leader. And so I think the power of managing and supporting ecosystems like that is really untapped. And I think it's very important in this world. So I would look at that.
So I want to sum that up in a way maybe for you that occurs to me as I was listening. So this goes back to it's all about people, right? So this is the human podcast episode. And this last bit, creating community, is really interesting because people have a desire to affiliate, right? They want to go to church, they want to go to school, they want to belong to a softball team, they want to belong to a movement within an industry where they're going to get some personal gain and maybe some social gain, right? Meet people that they might enjoy being with. But referral, it's a human thing, right? The idea that someone who knows you, trusts you, likes your product would definitely be willing to say, hey, you should try this. Whether it's the body shop where you got your car fixed or the software that helps you run your business. And maybe that's the big message of this episode is, what is the human aspect that you can tap into that's going to really help drive your business or your career as a CMO? How can you harness the way people think and the way they want to be dealt with, for everybody's benefit?
Yeah, what makes you think of is, so Bain did a study years back, and I don't remember all the details of it, but they identified that people don't buy for one reason, they buy for 30 reasons, is kind of what they came up with. And they built this like pyramid of the reasons. And so, there's basic like functionality reasons that people buy something, right? And then there's sort of outcome reasons, like it saves me time, it saves me money, it does these very functional outcome things. And then there's an emotional one, which I feel good using the tool. I like interacting with the company. My employees are happier because they have access to this. And then there's life-changing, which is like making this choice for my company. I helped my career. And at first I was thinking, does that really make sense? But then I remembered when I spent a few years at Salesforce through an acquisition, and I go to Dreamforce every year, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Salesforce fans that really will tell you, Salesforce changed my life. Salesforce helped me put my kids through college, right? And like, think about that as a marketer, right? And the highest point in the Bain pyramid, and maybe I'll find a link you can put in the show notes later.
Yeah, I was going to say we need this.
Is world changing. And again, Salesforce is a good example here, which is all of the, like Mark came out and said, we're going to make sure all the women at their roles are paid the same as the men. And we're just going to do that across the company. And I don't care what the financial hit is. And so, you think about like why people buy a product like Salesforce, well, it's potentially across all those dimensions. And as a great marketer, you want to be marketing across all those dimensions because that's how you're going to stand out and win.
Well, I think that is the ideal place to land the episode. Matt, thank you so much. Hey, if people want to learn more about your company or reach out to you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, MTRIFIRO, M Trifiro, and I'm happy to connect with anybody that sends me a nice note and explains they heard the podcast. Because there's too many BDRs and recruiters trying to get into my network.
Got to be nice.
But if you're one of Ken's listeners, I'll take you.
Nice. Thank you so much. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. On LinkedIn, I'm LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit, and website's austinlawrence.com. Matt Trifiro, thank you so much for humanizing marketing and really a great revealing episode.
Thanks, Ken. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.